Hello, everybody. We are here at the Teaching Edge, and I'm very excited to have with me here today Dan Sandhu from Sparx Learning. Dan is the CEO of Sparx, and Sparx are making a big difference every day for teachers, learners, and families through technology, but more important, technology that drives learning in a very personalized way, creating a lot of leverage for every teacher. I'm very grateful to have Dan join us today, and he brings huge experience in education, both in the UK and internationally, a real influencer in the world of education technology, a regular speaker about education and technology, an investor in the field, and has a big mission for Sparx. We'll soon talk about this mission. So let's get started, Dan. Welcome to the Teaching Ed podcast.
Welcome. Thank you for inviting me here. Really appreciate that.
That's wonderful. So let's start with, tell us about yourself, about Sparx Learning, what you do today, how this got started, and so on.
Brilliant, excellent. So I've been in education for a long time. I started off as an investor in education a long time ago, investing in early stage companies, and then that progressed slowly to being an advisor on the board and taking up executive responsibilities while building education businesses. I've not, and it's very important to understand this, and I'm sure we'll come back to this, I've not been a teacher before, and that's a really important thing to understand, that I'm doing this because I have a passion for education, not because I was a practitioner. And there's a very subtle but very important difference in that, in terms of mindset and in terms of the kind of people you surround yourself with. It's very important to know that. So I wasn't being a practitioner, but I've been in education and education technology for a while. I took over Sparx about 5 years ago. Initially, Sparx was in essence a research institute, which had been researching the different ways to deliver maths education in the UK since about 2010. I got involved in 2017 with a view to actually taking that and making a real impact in the world. At the time that I stepped into the role of CEO at Sparx end of 2017, early 2018, we were looking after about 3 schools in the southwest of England in Exeter. We had about 500 students and had about 10, 15 teachers using us. And that was a real start and real pilot phase. And it's really important because it's a part of the journey of how to build a sustainable long-term proposition in education. Over the last 5 years, we've grown significantly. We are currently in over 2,000 schools. In over nearly 60% of all schools in England use one of our products. We have a footprint in about 23 countries, with schools ranging from Chile, Ecuador, the US, to the Middle East and out in Australia. And that's an early view of what's happening in the market for us in terms of understanding international. For us, just to give everyone a bit of an overview of what Sparx delivers, Sparx has been very much focused on mathematics, and mathematics homework in particular. We have a number of other projects we're working on and building up, but we're really focused on mathematics, and that's to help support teachers able to set mathematics homeworks for students. We are obviously delivered in English. We're based on the UK English curriculum and all the different awarding bodies in the UK, but we are flexible enough to make sure that we follow the scheme of learning, of different schemes of learning with schools. So as the teacher delivers mathematics in the class, every week the homework is automatically set. It's personalized for every student. It's automatically marked. However, and this is a really important aspect, we expect all the students to handwrite their workbooks and show their workings. So we are very pedagogically focused. It's not just tapping a keyboard. It's not just multiple choice questions to get the answer right. It's very detailed. We have over 45,000 questions. We have 10,000 videos, which are very comprehensively done. We had a content team with the best mathematicians and practitioners from the UK, Cambridge University, Oxford, Warwick, etc., to create exceptional pedagogically exam quality questions. And that allows to ensures that we have exceptional content. And and again, we'll talk about that later, how I think content is the heart of education. So the Sparx story has been really owning that math space in the UK, maths homework. We've got a bit of a footprint in the classroom as well, but predominantly in the kind of maths homework space. During the course of the last few years, we acquired one of the other big players in mathematics, Hegarty Mathematics. So Hegarty is part of the Sparx framework as well. And over the next 12 months, the products are being combined to create one Sparx Maths product, which will happen in the next 12 months. So that's sort of the story from where we started to where we find ourselves now in terms of owning that ed tech space in the UK.
That's really amazing. And we'll soon talk about what Sparx does and what the product actually is. But already you've mentioned things that just bring to mind a very interesting question, which is how do you explain the big growth in just a short span of time? Obviously, you've brought a lot of business experience into the mix, of course, and but there is something obviously essential about the product really fitting the needs of the market for it to really be growing so substantially in the UK and beyond. What is the key factor for this? What is this strong match that you think is happening here?
I think it's really important to remember that to deliver effective support for teachers and students and to deliver an effective education technology product, it needs to be sustainable, it needs to be long-term sustainable and required. You have to address the need. You don't create a product, then look for the problem. You need to look at the problem first and then figure out how you solve it. We're very fortunate that we have 25% of our staff are ex-teachers. We work very closely with schools. So there are a number of schools that we've worked with for many years, nearly 12 years, to make sure we hone the product and hone the proposition and really understand the schools. I think we are in schools nearly every day. When during the pandemic, it was very difficult, and we're getting back into the rhythm of being in school every day. So the growth story literally is around teachers telling teachers. It's about having promoters within the schools. And we'll talk about the product shortly, but it's about making sure that you have your own support base within the school network. And so when one head talks to another head, they promote it. And we have a relationship not just with the maths teachers or the head of maths, but the head of the school. And where need be, the head of the multi-academy trust, because we think it's really important to get that top level buy-in, and therefore you're really working on the purpose and vision more than the product. So we don't talk about the functionality, we talk about the mission and the purpose and the benefits. And for education, that's the way you have to approach it. This is not another coffee machine. It's around making sure that you really understand how what you're doing solves a problem for the teacher and effectively gives an outcome to both the students while giving comfort to the parent. So you've got to get those three parts right.
So let's start with the vision and the problem. What is really the problem that's being solved here? That really makes teachers, tell other teachers and school heads to be working so closely with you. What is this vision and what is this big problem that you're solving, really?
I think from a purpose and mission perspective, the purpose was very simple. I was very clear to articulate this many years ago. We want to make sure we significantly improve the life opportunities of children and students around the world. And to do that, we need to make sure we are enabling teachers and we are motivating students. And this is based on research-based technologies, not just technologies which we think make a difference, but they're supported by pedagogical research. So the mission is all wrapped around making sure we're enabling teachers, we're motivating students, and we're doing this based on research-based technologies. And from that mission, you get the vision of actually how do we articulate that and we articulate it by how many millions of students whose life we can change. When I started at Sparx, the vision had been that we would change the lives of 1 million students by 2025. We've surpassed that. We're already at 1.9 million. But so I rephrased the vision to make it 5 million students by 2030. And I think we'll shoot past that as well at some stage. But the aim is to make sure you can articulate that so that you really can identify what success is. And it's really important to know what success looks like. And if you can identify success, you're going down the right direction. And therefore, you attract like-minded individuals to join the team. You attract like-minded schools to be your partners if you're articulating it in that respect. So that's what the purpose and the mission has been. It's underpinned, and let's not underestimate it, it's underpinned by having very strong values about caring for the team, very strong values about being empathetic, about being united as a team, about being very ethically driven in terms of what we're doing with the data and making some data-driven decisions, but also always about learning, to make sure that we're learning collectively as a team, and that's where we live in. And that, again, allows you to make sure you've got the right team around you. It allows you to make decisions in the right way. and you've got to weigh up whether you're making commercial decisions or impact decisions, and they're not necessarily the same thing sometimes. Sometimes they're in total conflict. And for us, impact always wins. And we always have to make the impact decision first. And my philosophy always is, if you are impactful, you are commercially sustainable. If you are commercially successful, you may not be impactful, therefore you will not be sustainable. So make sure you're impactful, because that will make you commercially sustainable and a long-term proposition.
Excellent, excellent. I'm taking notes as we speak. It's very good. So, how do you? By the way, what you said about really measuring, as you and as you are mentioning, what you want to measure as the number of students you impact. This really reflects in the product itself, which is highly measured all the time. So, so if we go, step by step. Now I want to talk about really what is the problem that you are solving.
Yeah.
So what is this particular problem? How do you communicate it?
So I think we step back and before we talk about the problems being solved by individual products or propositions, let's step back and think about what the environment and the ecosystem is. We're in an ecosystem. We're in the UK. We're in the UK. We're solving educational outcome issues in the UK, which are driven by a teacher workload which is unsustainable, by content that needs to be exceptional, by a process which is still governed by examinations at particular points, summative assessment points, in an environment where people could easily argue that content is ubiquitous and that's not a USP. So you can have this very weird environment. So there's a number of problems we solve. Firstly, we solve the teacher challenge problems. That is the workload that teachers have and the inability to humanly do a lot of the things they need to do because of the distractions they have in the day life, in terms of not being able to teach, administration, workload, managing other aspects of that life rather than the academic teaching. So first, it's clearing that administration workload, making sure they actually have time to teach. That's one aspect of it. And that's also around making sure it's an affordable proposition. So what doesn't cost them the earth to make sure they can deliver that. Secondly, is to make sure that we take the student on the journey and make sure that what we're doing with the student and the content we provide is pedagogically sound. It's validated to understand that it's at the level that the student is operating at, and it's making sure it's an easy and usable technology, not necessarily gamified. We've got to get the balance right between engagement and outcomes. You can have a very engaged student, they learn nothing, or you can have a student that is so unengaged they learn nothing. You get the balance right so they're engaged enough, but they are learning and not just busy on a screen. Doing that while remembering the core precepts of education and what's required in terms of pedagogy, in terms of deep learning, in terms of designing the content in a way that drives learning. So getting that balance right. The problem, if we look at the product, the Sparx Maths, the homework product, the problem that's solving is ensuring that students do 1 hour of maths homework every week regularly, and it's completed and they move forward. And so that process, and while doing that, you're providing information to the students on how to do the questions, providing video tutorials as you're doing the question, making sure that there's a process in place so they write down their workings. There's a process in place that marks it automatically. However, they have to write their workbook. It's old-fashioned, but they have to write everything in their workbook, and we know when they don't. Very clever technology we have that knows that when they don't. So it's not just tapping a screen, it's actually writing workings. And that information is then shared with the teacher, who knows how long it took someone to do the question, how many times they looked at the video, and what challenge they had. And it provides information to the teacher about all the students, when the homework is set, how far they've got it, how many people have started the homework, how many students have it, when have they completed the homework, information to the head of maths to see how individual classes are doing, information to the head of the school in terms of how maths is performing at the school, information to the head of the multi-academy trust in terms of how all the schools are performing. So it's an information flow to the student, to the teacher, and to the school. And importantly, to the parent. So the parent will be getting an email every week or contact every week about what their ward, their child, their daughter, their ward is doing in terms of maths that week, what homework they're doing, and a help video for them so they can move up in mathematics as well, because parents are notoriously scared of mathematics. and therefore you want to make sure the parent goes on the journey as well.
Yeah. So, so really, you started with saying that this really you ensure that that the student does 1 hour of homework of math per week.
That's correct. Yes.
And so, explain a little bit how this works. So they get. I understand that they get assigned, personalized problems, and how does this not become, another one of these, online websites where they just get problems to solve?
I think what we have to look at two things. Firstly, we need to make sure we have actual evidence and research that it works. There is no point doing anything in education unless you can evidence the efficacy. There is no point, and I advocate. I set up something called the EdTech Evidence Group, and I set that up because I wanted schools to challenge EdTech providers to say, do you provide evidence that what you're doing makes a difference? Yeah. Not just engage the students, but what evidence do you have that it makes a difference? And that's really important. So we are very, very persistent in making sure that we have evidence, not only that the students are engaged, not only that they do their homework, which is great, but they actually learn. And so we shared all our data with RAND and with Cambridge University's Faculty of Education. We independently commissioned that research. We published all our research on our website. From the very simplest question, does homework make a difference? Forget maths. Should students do homework? All the way through to how does Sparx Maths homework support a child in learning, all the way through from learning the pedagogical process of it all the way through exams. So we want to monitor that the school students are engaged in homework and moving forward, and the teachers know this is happening as well, and the teachers are providing that support.
So what do you find then from your research? How much homework is the right amount for?
That's $1 million question. That's $1 million. So we actively look at this. I mean, we've over the years we've fluctuated between anything between about 50 minutes to just over 1 hour, and we're now roughly between 55 minutes and 65 minutes. It doesn't matter how good you are at maths or how much you need to develop in math. It's about the same. If you're good at maths, it doesn't mean you finish your homework in 20 minutes. You get more. If you might get more questions. If you're finding it challenging, you'll get less questions but more support. But it's about the same time, and that seems to be very effective. We've got really positive feedback from our schools. We have school retention rates of over 90%, higher than 90%. We have teachers feeding us back all the time. So we're always learning. It's never perfect. We're always learning. But that seems to be about right. Now, whether the students themselves like doing 1 hour maths homework a week or not, that's up for debate, and we can debate the merits or not of homework. And I don't know how you were as a 11, 12, 13-year-old, and whether you would enjoy 1 hour of maths homework a week. Everyone's different. We think it's a good thing, and we kind of encourage that engagement. We get the parents on board, and we don't really get objections about the length of homework at all. That's not the challenge we have. The challenge we always have is to make sure it works very well for each student.
Yeah. So how do you make it work well for each student? How do you do this personalization part?
So we have I'm quite vocal. I'm quite vocal in the industry about smoke and mirrors. I'm quite vocal about people standing up on stage and saying how AI is going to solve the world.
Yeah.
That's just silly. I mean, the teacher's there to do the job. The teacher's there and is the closest person to understand how everyone's going to deliver. The teacher's there, the closest person who can actually support the learner and understand how each learner is operating. What we do is enable that. So we're really lucky that we've got a great platform. We've got a great technology platform and an AI engine which works underneath to personalize the homework, to make sure it's very adaptive, to make sure we understand the learning patterns that each student has, their behaviors on how they answer questions, the time it takes, how many times they need to look at the video, how many times they get it wrong before they get it right, and therefore we can go on that journey. It is very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult. And I say that openly. It's taken us many, many years to get that right. That sequencing of questions is the biggest challenge. And we have an internal research team. We have an education research team internally, which is forever doing that, forever looking at that model and saying, is it right? Is it right? Can it be better? Can it be better? And it's our version of easy AI or human interface AI, where we're actively involved in that process. It doesn't go into a black box and an answer comes out. Absolutely not. We are really actively involved to make sure we review that model on a regular basis.
So let me ask you about this sequencing. When you say sequencing, does that mean that you would recognize what the next problem should be, or the next instruction, or the next video should be based
it's about what the next problem should be to reinforce the learning or to fill in the gap. It's to make sure we reinforce the learning. So, you may be having algebra homework this week, but you may have a fractions question dropped in because we remember you had a challenge with fractions 2 weeks ago. So it's to reinforce the learning, make sure the repetition is there, but in that subject of algebra, to make sure we are dragging someone along at the right pace. And it's not easy. It's not a magic formula. I'm not going to stand up and say it's going to solve all the world's problems. It is very difficult to get right, and we are learning all the time to make sure we keep refining it. And it's never going to be perfect. It can't be. It'd be silly for me to stand up here and say we're perfectly going to solve it. It's going to take time. Nor do I say our AI platform can learn a student's journey in 3 seconds or 10 seconds. Or I've seen people say in 10 minutes we can understand how. No, you can't. It's silly. It takes weeks. I've seen people say within half an hour we can figure it. No, you can't. It's just bullshit. It takes a while to get it right. So we know for the first 2 or 3 weeks we're understanding how it works, and by the end of the third or fourth homework we're kind of getting there, and it gets better and better, and therefore we know that's how long it takes to get it right and perfect.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense once you hear it. Once you hear someone else, explain differently, then you might believe differently. But once you hear it, it makes a lot of sense, because it's a complex thing to do.
Yeah.
Now, something that's interesting for me to hear: what do you do at the edges, meaning the very good students or the ones with many, many gaps? How eventually they need to sit at the same classroom where the teacher has to aim for some kind of average. How does working with the platform impact this?
That's a brilliant question. If I go all the way back to when Sparx was founded, and even before I got involved, that was one of the big challenges. You can always teach to average. It's easy to teach to average. You do the distribution curve, you focus on the 80%, life is good. That's not where the problem lies. The problem lies in the bottom quartile. They are the students that need the most help. Top quartile is a different challenge, and I'll come back to that later.
They might be bored.
It's a bigger. So what we do is we make sure we don't want anyone left behind. No one gets left behind. So because we do multiple years, and we will always make sure that the question formulation, it may drop a year for those students. It may go back to what they were doing last year, but they are brought along. The more experienced students, the more better are stretched as well. So each student gets stretched or gets pulled up. So we look at the edges as much as we look at the average, to be honest, because that's very important. Because you want the star students who are keen mathematicians and naturally gifted to be stretched, to the next year level question. If they're in year 7, year 8. Then year 8, year 9, and you want the students below who still are transitioning into secondary to pick up content which is relevant for year 6.
Yeah. And then what happens when they come back to the classroom?
They come back to the class. So they come back to the classroom, and what the teacher will know immediately is she'll know what the challenges were in the class. So she'll know what the top 5 problems the children had with that homework, and we'll go through them. And she'll know that because she'll know every student's analysis of which ones finished their homework first, had a challenge, took 3 times to do it, looked at the videos, didn't look at the videos, did it quickly, and who was stretched and did the extra homework. There's optional homework, who did the optional homework, who did the core homework, how long did it take? and will be able to make sure they spend time doing what teachers do, is teaching for the student, not for the average. So they'll be able to know in a class, right, okay, I know I've got 4 students there that need help, this one doesn't. So that's what we're developing going forward as Sparx Learning is much more of a platform which will operate in class as well. So we're starting off with homework, but that'll naturally progress in terms of how we support the classroom. We have about 50 schools globally that we're supporting in the classroom to take all that learning, and over the next few years we'll do more and more pieces inside the classroom.
Yeah, that's wonderful. What are the main things you hear from teachers? Where do they find the biggest impact using the product?
I think the biggest impact is the time they save. It's the inability teachers have to set personalized homework. It'll be really silly for me to do the classic ed tech thing to do is I save teachers millions of hours a year because they wouldn't do it anyway. Teachers don't have time to set 30 homeworks. So don't be silly. Teachers will set one homework. They won't go around setting 30 homeworks every week for all their kids. So just try to calculate some number, which is useless. It's idiotic. So I'm not going to say that wouldn't happen anyway. But what we do is even the base concept of setting homework gets easier because it's automatically set. Teachers have all the right. I mean, we don't, again, no black box. The teachers can go in and maybe there was a fire alarm. Maybe there was an issue. They couldn't teach that subject that week. They can take it out of the homework, or they can add some homework because they're running ahead of schedule. So the teachers can adapt the homework. They have absolute right to make sure the homework is adapted to what they need to. Most teachers don't because we're pretty much on track. So that saves them time. The homework automatically gets issued. The chasing doesn't need to get done because the teacher knows who's done the homework. And if the homework is due on a Wednesday, they'll know on Monday morning who's done it the weekend, who hasn't. They don't need to ask the students all the time. They know which 3 students never do their homework, so they kind of save that time. The marking is automatically done, so that doesn't take time.
Yeah.
The collection of data is automatically done. So what can the teachers spend their time doing? Teach. And that's what teachers love. The teachers love the fact that all the administration, the reporting is all done, all that's taken away, all the painful stuff which the teachers have to do gets taken away, and they're allowed to teach.
That's excellent. And what is your aim in measuring? What do you want to measure? Do you want to measure their success in homework, or do you want to measure their success in assessments, or do you want to measure their overall attitude towards math, which, as you know, many adults walk all day with some kind of issue with mathematics because of what happened. So it's impacting so many different areas. What do you think is important really to measure?
I think there's always been a I can't do maths boast almost. I mean, there's parents at school gates which will easily say to other parents, I can't do maths. I don't see many parents at the boast saying, I can't do literacy. But they're happy to say I can't do maths. So that's a challenge. It's a human nature. People are scared of mathematics for lots of different reasons. And so what we try to do is break down those barriers. Hence why we engage the parents a lot. Hence why we want the parents to be involved. The parents get communication from us about what homework is this week. And if it's algebra, they'll work. Then we give them some tips as well on how to do algebra. So we're kind of helping the parents. But from what we're trying to solve, there's multiple things. In ed tech, you can get focus on results. You can get focus on outcomes. We like to be focused on learning. In effect, I think my preference is for schools to manage the grades. That's their process. For us to manage the outcomes and the learning. Schools to manage the outcomes and the grades, for us to manage the learning.
The learning, yeah.
What we wanted is evidence of learning. Did what we do, not just engage the student, because we want the students to be engaged, of course, but are they learning? And we can tell that they're learning because we can see how they're able to speed up in their ability to answer questions, tackle more problems, or we can present more problems. So for us, it's always about the efficacy of learning, the evidence we can gather, the data we can gather. With 1.9 million children doing the homework every week, we can gather a lot of data. Yeah.
Now, let's touch just on one of the points that you mentioned about writing homework.
Yeah.
Why is it important, and how do you make sure this happens?
I'm not going to give all the secrets away, you know that.
Okay.
So I think it's really important. I suppose some of our pedagogy is very, very traditional. I personally like the concept of having a pen in your hand all the time. Even in the current world where the pen is electronic, doesn't matter. There's something about learning by writing. And, if you look at some of the readings, some of the kind of research done on the concept of learning, writing with your hand is something which happens when it drives more learning in the brain, actually enables a learning process. Tapping on a screen is interesting, but the retention isn't there. Writing drives retention. So what we'd ensure is that all the questions that get answered on Sparx, they have to be written in the workbook. The workbook has to be given back to the teacher. The teacher looks at the workbook. I imagine like the teacher looked at my workbook all those years ago to see what a teacher wants to see. Is it neat? Are all the workings there? Is it not just the answer, but the workings? If there's a mistake made, would they have got the marks right for the workings as well as the answer? And to enable that, we have a bit of technology which makes sure we nudge the student to do them. And as the homework progresses, we continue to remind them. And there's little ways we have to do that, which ensures that on the Wednesday morning, the teacher won't just be told by the system that the homework is done. They will have the pile of workbooks, which I remember from my days at school, that you dreaded handing your workbook back to the maths teacher. The difference in this is the workbooks that the teacher received are already marked.
Yeah.
The students have almost self-marked all the workbooks, so the teacher doesn't have to mark them, which our teachers used to. Now they just know, they look at the workbooks, they can pick a workbook. And, we on Twitter and social media, we see teachers taking photographs of workbooks and tweeting them. They're exceptional. They're just brilliant. I mean, you look at those workbooks and think, my God, my workbook was never that neat, that's for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned the time it saves. It's I think it's more than the time that you need to create individualized homework. It's actually grading. We know the teachers, the one thing that they would rather not do is grade all day.
It's taking books home. It's taking I had teachers who used to finish at 10 o'clock every night grading.
And
so that's got to help. But you still want to make sure all of this ed tech, everything sits with the teacher. We've got to be really clear about that. You can't at all undermine the teacher. You cannot overwhelm the teacher. You can't disenfranchise the teacher. The teacher has to be totally enabled. The teacher needs to say, this is a tool that is helping me teach. And if it doesn't answer that question, the teacher will not adopt it. The teacher should not adopt it. Because why would you make the teacher's life any more difficult? And there's enough challenges in the world for the teacher anyway. So if the teacher can answer the question, does this make my life easier? I'm sure the teacher's also interested in, does this make the children learn? And that's important as well. But let's not kid ourselves. You're not going to get to that question until you get to the first question. Mm-hmm. A majority of the teachers will say, does this allow me to teach? Then if it allows me to teach, I can actually deliver the second answer that it makes it better for the students as well. Because otherwise you're going to have a large subset of teachers who are unable to find the time to get to question number 2 in terms of help the students. So that's really important. And it's not easy. It's very difficult. I mean, the pandemic made a big difference in the perception of ed tech. This was always a challenge beforehand. And I was at a conference last week and people were talking about how has the recession affected teaching and education. I think it's the same difference. Schools never had money before. You have to go back 20 years when schools last had money. So don't tell me that the recession has changed spending habits somehow. The schools never had money. It's just, they really just have to be careful where they spend it all the time.
Yeah. So when you look at the impact of technology, really, what you're saying is really that the biggest impact is enabling the teacher to do their job better. Really,
I think there's a number of things changing in the classroom at the moment. I think during the pandemic, the UK government, in their wisdom, issued lots more one-to-one devices. Very important. So the classrooms became a lot more technologically savvy. And I think that technology in the classroom still has lots of challenges, but that was one of the big steps forward. And I think that's really important in terms of understanding how ed tech plays a role. You need the tech, not just the ed. You need the ability to deliver that. I think we've tried to make sure technology is impactful by way of making sure that at least in the home environment, be it on a Chromebook device, laptop, desktop, or mobile, students are able to do their homework in whichever device is available, but ideally on a laptop device. But I think that's where we'll focus all our efforts on in terms of from a homework perspective. We'll get to looking at the classroom environment again, as I said, in the next few years.
Okay, so if we look at the future of Sparx, where do you see developing other subjects or different methods? Where is it going?
I think we enjoy supporting teachers. We enjoy supporting teachers in classroom. Homework's been a great start for us. I mean, it sounds a bit after 5 years and being in nearly 60% of all English schools, I say it's a start, but it is a start. We've got it's a big journey ahead for Sparx. And I think for us, we're exceptionally data driven. So we're always talking to our stakeholders, be it the teachers or the students or the heads of multi-academy trusts. What we don't do is develop technology for the sake of technology. It's about developing systems which impact the students and make a difference for the long term. So for our journey going forward, yes, maths has been our predominant, overwhelming piece, but we're starting to look at other subjects to see, can we adapt our learnings in other subjects in other ways? And we'll talk to everyone about that once we've got there. We're really fortunate that we have a research and development team within Sparx that is forever testing new ideas. We have a number of pilot schools around the country we work with, and that's again addressing the same challenges, maybe in maths, maybe in other subjects, of how do we address those challenges of the teacher being able to spend more time teaching, make it in more digestible form for the students, and keeping content as the heart of what we offer.
So do you see this expanding to other STEM areas or even beyond STEM?
I think we're looking at a number of areas, and we take our time to do everything. It's about, again, as you said right at the beginning, we'll do some research. We'll make sure we get some research done to make sure we do it right. I think the STEM areas are really interesting because we've got a maths as a good base, but that doesn't mean we put literacy to one side. I'm a big fan of literacy. I think literacy and numeracy go hand in hand in terms of one of the core globally recognized competencies, ones of the foundational competencies required under the United Nations, UNESCO, and the SDG goals. Literacy and numeracy are really key, and I really want to focus on those areas.
Yeah. Wow. One final question. In the hopes that many teachers will get to know the technology, to know the products, where do they go? How do they find it? How do they get started?
I think it's really important in EdTech to look at, from a school's perspective, the overall digital strategy. It's really important. You shouldn't just go buy a product or a solution, be it curriculum or be it infrastructure, be it attendance or reporting. You really need to step back and say, as a school, and it's independent, a majority of schools are on their own, but even multi-academy, just what is the overall digital strategy? How does one use technology in the whole school? Both in terms of learning, in terms of administration, in terms of reporting, in terms of teacher training, in terms of informing the parent. And I think that becomes, once you do that, then you can step into there and say, within that overall framework, what are the problems we're trying to solve that can't be solved or are solved in an ad hoc manner that need to step back and solve? And within that, and from a Sparx perspective, what curriculum technologies are required to solve that absolute learning evidence? I think I would always encourage teachers to look at the kind of the non-profit I set up called the EdTech Evidence Group, and there's a number of guides and tips on the EdTech Evidence Group in terms of how to choose technology, how to focus on research, how to understand your evidence, what is a problem you're trying to solve. The fact that there's different types of evidence, look at pedagogy, look at the rigorous way EdTech is developing pedagogy. Is it just a marketing ploy? Is it a systematic pedagogy within an EdTech which continues not just for marketing, but for developing new products? And ultimately, having the agency to challenge. Sometimes I feel schools don't think they can challenge technology because it's tech. Forget the technology. Look at what the problem you're trying to solve is and challenge based on the problem. Ask the EdTech providers the really key questions. Pedagogy questions. Ask them pedagogy questions. Again, no technology involved. Ask them how many schools have used the product for how long. And saying that one school has used it for 5 weeks is not evidence. How has evidence been collected and what was a problem being solved? Not the evidence collected. You can collect any evidence. What problem were you solving and have you got evidence to suggest that those problems have been solved? What type of evidence? You can have everything from school anecdotes, the head of a school said it's wonderful, all the way through to a double-blind randomized control trial at medical standard. Okay, as Sparx, that's what we did. And we did a double-blind randomized control trial so you can have all that range, but you need to understand what value it has. And if you can get that balance right, then actually as a school, you're much better informed and much better able to challenge before you even get to the technology question about what you need to solve in terms of that. Asking for evidence is really important. Asking for something which once you implement in your school, it has to be there for a few years. No teacher, no head wants to take a curriculum product and switch and swap every year. You don't want to do that. You want it embedded. You want to have multiple years of it, and then have actually look at the outcomes over multiple years before you make any choices about changing in the future.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it all makes a lot of sense, but you have to hear it. You have to hear it because it's not intuitive at all. Especially with we are getting used to technology giving you instant solutions, and if it doesn't work, find something else. But it's not what you're saying. You have to look at the long game.
You've got to look at the long game because think about and people hate it when I say this, but EdTech can do as much damage as good. Just think about it. Not the money. Schools' money is one thing. Imagine wasting a child's time for a year on an EdTech product which takes them backwards. Yeah. You may be able to get the £1,000 back, but you're never going to get the time back. So it is old, measure twice, cut once. Don't rush. Take your time. You don't want to get the EdTech product this year. Don't get it next year. But once you get it, get the right thing. Don't just try to do this to impress your head. Don't try to do this to impress your head of department, because it'll come back to bite you if you get it wrong. And forget your ego. Imagine the kid's time. Geez, imagine the time you're going to waste of a student on a product which you've realized afterwards was a vanity product or not effective. Yeah. I say this to people who want to use Sparx. Ask us all the horrible questions, please. If we can't satisfyingly answer them, don't buy it. Even Sparx, don't buy it. If you're not satisfied with anything we say, please don't buy it, because you don't want that on your conscience. You don't want to buy a product which you're not happy with, because that's going to be bad for you, and you're not going to be able to recycle it or replace it quickly, and you'll be stuck with something you don't want. That's unhealthy.
Yeah. Well, I think without maybe trying, I think one of the first questions I asked you when we started was what you, when you look at the growth that you've seen and why this happens, and you said it's teachers recommending other teachers. I think what you've now said really, just listening to you talk, I think this idea as a company that you care so much about the future of these children and of making the right choice, and I think it just shines through when people encounter you. I'm sure this is what happens because having known many people in technology, you don't hear many people address technology in that way, looking at the person first, and then later at what we can do to help them. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
Wonderful to hear.
I appreciate that. I think that the reality is, education is very unique as a sector, as you know. It's very difficult to equate education to any other sector. Because we are affecting the lives of children so directly that it's a moral obligation to get it right. I always say, it's a moral obligation. If you can do it, you have to do it. There's a moral obligation to do it. Yeah. And if you can get that balance right in your head, it really makes decision-making very easy.
Dan, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. It's been a pleasure to be very much for having
me. To 30 million and beyond. So it was 5 million. I made it 30 million because of 2030. So let's say to 30 million and beyond.
Thank you.
And again, thank you so much. It's been great.
Pleasure. Thank you, Mary. Thank you.